Hi there, I'm Rose Jordan with Visit Mineral Wells, and I'm here with Carol Montgomery of Clark Gardens Botanical Park. This beautiful 50-acre oasis is definitely a family venture. It was built as a private garden by Max and Billy Clark, Carol's parents. And you can still see Max working in the gardens from time to time. We'll talk more about the gardens later, but right now Carol is going to teach us all about how to garden to attract pollinators. So Carol, what are pollinators and what do we need to know to encourage them to come to our garden?
Well, there's a lot you need to know, actually. You think it's kind of easy to start a pollinator garden, but there's some things to think about before you start. And pollinators pollinate over 75% of the food we eat. So if we don't continue to garden for pollinators, then we won't have near as much to eat, especially the fresh vegetables and also flowers. So pollinators are really important to our ecosystem. But the first thing that you need to do before you start any garden, be it your vegetable garden or a pollinator garden, is to know what you have as far as your soil. What's the difference between dirt and soil? That's what a lot of people will come out and talk to me about. Oh, you're digging in the dirt. And I'm going to say, no, I'm digging in the soil. And dirt is, think of a dirt road. It's hard. Rain runs off of it. It's not fertile. But soil is teeming. Good soil is teeming with bacteria, fungi, real earthworms, and that's what you want. You want a soil that you have nurtured, and it's not your pollinators will thrive in that environment, not just survive. So the first thing to think about when you're starting your garden is feed the soil, feed the plant. And a lot of times we think just backwards. We spend a lot of money and time buying fertilizers and things to make our flowers grow. And I'm not saying sometimes you don't need to do that, but if you have a healthy soil, then you're not going to have to feed your plant. That soil will feed your plant. And the first thing I would ask anyone to do, and you're so excited, you want to run out and buy the flowers, you're gung-ho, but you need to test your soil. And we'll put a link below of how to test your soil. You can go through the Texas AgriLife in your county extension, and that's going to tell you a lot about your soil. It's going to tell you if you have a good amount of nitrogen, and we all put in nitrogen on our plants. Maybe we have too much. Sometimes you can add too much. But it will tell you if your soil is acid or alkaline, and that helps you choose the right plant. You want to choose a plant for your soil. So let's say you're in love with gardenias. Well, I'm going to probably discourage you from growing gardenias in this part of Texas because they're an acidic plant. And if you have alkaline like we do here, then you have to spend a lot of time getting that gardenia. You have to supplement your soil, and you can't just change your soil from alkaline to acidic. So I'm going to tell you to know your soil, know your pH, and then choose the right plant for that pH. Those are kind of your number one things you need to do. Well, how do you have a healthy soil? Well, I'm going to ask you to not put chemical fertilizers on. Now, don't you guys that love your chemical fertilizer, you can keep doing it, but I think you're going to have a healthier soil if you use organics. And one of the examples we use, I'm not pushing this brand at all, but this is just a very healthy organic fertilizer. And the most important thing, it has lots of, alfalfa, fish meal, it's full of microorganisms, but the one thing, it's really a key that I'd encourage all of you to use in your fertilizers are humates. And humates are the remains of plants and animals as thousands of years as the dirt builds up and it is mined. So it's full of micronutrients and macronutrients. So you need both of those things. So look for any fertilizer you're using, look for something that has humates. And so we're going to stay away from the chemical fertilizers, and we're going to add some good organic fertilizer. The other thing about organic fertilizer is it's slow release for the most part. You can see these are just some pellets. You kind of can't overdo an organic fertilizer. I guess you could if you went crazy, but you wouldn't. But that is a great way to get your soil healthy. Also, biodiversity. Now, most home gardeners aren't going to plant a monoculture of corn, say, or cotton for that matter, or all roses or all one flower. But you want a biodiversity. You want shrubbery, perennials, trees, and different flowers, not all one thing. And then, like we've talked about, you want to choose the right plant for your site. Does your yard get sun or shade, or part sun or part shade? So all of that all goes into before you start any garden. But let's get right on into pollinators. So like Rose said, butterflies, bees, and one of the things that we forget about bees a lot of times is we're all familiar with honeybees and bumblebees, but we're not familiar with the native bees. And native bees are solitary bees. They usually live in the ground or in hollowed out trees or a pile of shrubbery. They're not forming a group like your honeybees, but they pollinate about 75% of our plants. And so we forget about them, but they're really important. So remember, you're also going for native bees. Beetles. Not many people think about beetles as being a pollinator. We all love a hummingbird and we feed those, but other birds are also pollinators. So let's talk specifically about butterflies for a few minutes. With butterflies, you need two kinds of plants. I think we all fail at this. It takes effort. You need the nectar plant. The nectar plant is what is providing the food for the butterfly, for the adult butterfly. They're the ones that you think of as blooming, beautiful plants, but you also have to have the host plant. What does a host plant do? Well, let's just take, for example, the monarch butterfly. We all know they migrate from Mexico to Canada, and an adult monarch butterfly will only lay her eggs on milkweed. And milkweed, or we're losing milkweed because it usually grows out in the wild, but as our urban areas encroach upon more rural areas, you're losing some of that milkweed. It's kind of hard to get started in your own garden, but you have to have milkweed or that adult monarch will not lay her eggs. Why? When those eggs hatch, the larva only eats milkweed, and it will go through all of its larval stages on that one plant until it forms its chrysalis or cocoon. So on our pollinator islands, we have 3. This is our first one, and all of them have some interpretive signage to help you learn and maybe get your curiosity going about what else you can do in your garden. But 2 of them are host plants, they're nectar plants. They're providing the food for the adult butterflies and bees and beetles, etc. But one island is what we call the host island. We call it the nursery. And that's where we hope that the butterflies find what they need to feed their larvae. For example, fennel and rue and parsley are great for swallowtail butterflies. And I can tell you for sure that a swallowtail laid her eggs on my own personal parsley that I have for my kitchen garden, and those larvae ate that down to a stick. It came back. I didn't care. I would rather have the larva and the caterpillar than I would rather have that parsley for a time being. So you have to think when you're planting, do you have enough of those 2 plants, your food source and your host plant for the eggs? You also want to think about plants a mindset of color and structure. So we all know hummingbirds like a tubular plant. A great example here would be the coral honeysuckle. And we'll talk a little bit more about the coral honeysuckle. It's a Texas native. It is not like your invasive, old-fashioned honeysuckle. And butterflies, bees, hummingbirds, sorry about that. Guys, hummingbirds love the trumpet-shaped flowers. So you want to, and then you want to have flowers that have a big, flat, it can be like think of zinnia or sunflower, where they can land on top of that, stay there for a little while, and eat. So you need all forms of your flowers, and you need all different colors. For example, hummingbirds love red. Your bees like purples and blues, and your butterflies like the yellows, the oranges, and the reds. So you want to not have just a few plants, because you're not going to get the butterflies or bees or other pollinators that you want. Additionally, you don't want to plant, say, one marigold. You want at least a 3x3 area of that color. It doesn't have to be all marigolds, but it can be, but as something's flying by, it has to see it, and one marigold is going to get lost. So when you're planting your garden, you want to think about planting in swaths of at least 3 feet by 3 feet of the same color. But just as important as having the right plant for the pollinators, there are two other really important things to talk about, and that is shelter. And shelter you really need to leave in your yard. It's kind of a scruffy area. Maybe it's not going to win the prize for the prettiest yard, but like we talked about the native bees, they need a place to go and hang out. They need a place that they're safe from. So we encourage you to have like a pile of sticks or logs or leaves or grass you don't always cut, because they need shelter. And then lastly, and almost just as important as all the other two, is water. You need some form of water in your pollinator garden. It can be as simple as a bowl that you put water in when you're watering your plants, or it can be a simple bird bath. Here we're pretty lucky. We have lots of water, and we're providing water for the pollinators. So let's take a look at a couple of the plants we have and why we would have those. So we're out on one of the pollinator islands, one of the nectar islands. Remember, that is for providing food for your pollinators. And we like to think of Clark Garden as a 50-acre pollinator garden, but these three are specifically here to demonstrate what can grow and what you might want to think about growing in your garden. You'll get into a debate about whether to use Texas natives or non-native plants. I would encourage you to look at Texas natives and then add adaptable plants. You want plants that are adaptable to our climate, to what can take the heat in the summer, and again, what type of soil you have. So you don't always have to have all Texas natives. But here is a beautiful Texas native that I would encourage you to look at. It's the Texas coral honeysuckle. It's not the kind of honeysuckle we all grew up with in the 60s, or some of us grew up in the 60s. This is a native. It's been around forever, and you can see it just grows right there. We have a bee going in, if you can see the bee, but it blooms early, so it provides that early bloom for the pollinators. Also, when you're thinking about which plants to use, remember you want to have plants that feed the pollinators from February through November. And that February is hard. You have to really think about what you can do in your garden in February, because that's not normally when our gardens are awake. What I personally do is I let my fall vegetable garden go to bolt. And when it bolts, it sends up a bunch of yellow flowers, and we'll just have all sorts of pollinators on that area. So Again, think about what time of year something will bloom and try to cover those months. For example, here is our black-eyed Susan, and it's not going to bloom until summer. Nice big yellow blooms, and so it's our summer bloom. You can also see there's a wide patch of it. It's probably about a 6 by 6, so that will give the pollinators something to see and land on when they're flying over. But behind it, we have some salvia, or sage is what some people call it. There's a couple of different kinds. It's blooming now, and it's a good one to have for an April, May, June. Then it comes back in the fall. Here right at our feet is yarrow, and it has not bloomed yet. It should bloom more in June. Common variety is yellow. This is a mixture of colors. A couple of weeds in there too. Thistles supposedly flower and are good for pollinators, but they're not supposed to be here. But we'll just ignore those. But yarrow is a good one. This is another plant that is just barely up. It's called the fall obedient plant. The trick for that, it's not a big patch. We've had trouble with this one taking hold, but it will grow in the fall. It will bloom in the fall. And then you don't always think of a tree as being a pollinator, but this great magnolia, when it has its beautiful white blossoms and blooms, are perfect for the beetles, and it actually needs the beetles to pollinate its flowers, to increase the flowers on the magnolia tree. Then coming around here, we've got tick seed, a beautiful yellow flower. It's just starting to bloom, so it's going to come in and bloom again this early summer, and then it'll die back a little bit in the summer because most plants can't take a lot of our summer, and then it will thrive in the fall again. And then many of you are aware of the Texas star hibiscus plant. It's barely coming up. You can see it's about 3 or 4 inches. It'll end up being at least 6 feet, have giant star-shaped red flowers. And this thing loves the summer. That's one of the reasons that you want this Texas star hibiscus. And then lastly, this is a great pollinator, lyre leaf sage. I actually have a love-hate relationship with this. So when you plant it, be sure you love it, because it's going to be an evergreen, it's going to be a ground cover, and it can encroach on other areas of your garden. So you need to kind of keep it where you're okay with that happening. But you can see it's an early bloomer, pretty blue flower. It's nice because it's an evergreen. So to sum up some of what we've talked about today is I would encourage you to have good, healthy soil. And if you'll remember the saying, feed the soil, feed the plant. You want to have both nectar and host plants. You want to give them, the pollinators, adult pollinators, something to eat, and the larvae something to eat. So that's your host plant. You want to provide shelter for your pollinators, and you also want to provide water.
So Carol, we're going to take everybody on a virtual tour of some of the gardens, but I'm wondering, do you have any favorite spots here?
Oh, that's sort of a hard one. It's currently usually what I'm working on, but the channel garden is always can always guarantee that it will please you. The daffodils out there today are phenomenal. Snapdragons are 2 to 3 feet tall. So the channel garden has to be the one that's a stable. However, my personal, because of the family context, is the weenie roast. The bronze statues that are out near the train station, not too far from the train station, and they depict a family tradition. My mom always, when all the grandkids were here, which she had 6, really didn't like her house to be messed up. So she would always plan a weenie roast, and that's what this honors, is that Saturday afternoon weenie roast. There was always a dog involved. There was always kids running in and out and dirty, and there was always hot dogs stuck on a stick. And so that's what the weenie roast site is, very much a family a family memory.
So those statues aren't just some random sculptor's
No,
ideas. That's your family.
Yeah, it's my mother and my 3 children and my sister's 3 children, and the sculptures were molded from pictures of them when they were young. So, yeah, no, they're not a random at all.
So I've been here lots of times. I've actually spent quite a bit of time out here, and even still, I know that I have not seen all of the gardens. I'm always seeing new things that I didn't know were there. So if somebody were coming out and they only had an hour to spend, what are the places that you would say, make sure you don't miss? I know the Botanical Gardens we talked about because they're pretty iconic for the Clark Gardens. But what are some other places, if you only have an hour, that you want to make sure that you go see?
I would encourage you to go see the train station.
Yes.
Men and children love those G-scale trains. They're entertaining for all ages. Oxbow is a really nice place to come if you have a little more time and you can have a picnic. Oxbow is awesome. The fountain, and there's wildlife and there's fish. So it's a really fun place to sit. If you have a little more time, the Historic Tree Trail has an audio. But if you're limited to really how long you have and how mobile you are, you can also do a cart tour.
Okay.
That's prearranged, and you get to see all of the garden and you're in a guided cart tour, and a volunteer. Sometimes they tell the real story and sometimes they make up the story, but it's a great way to see all of the garden.
Funny. Okay, so speaking of stories, we used to have ducks, and you know how they are when they get to making their noises. Now, I've always considered that them laughing, ducks laughing. When you hear it, what are you thinking? Are they yelling and fussing?
It makes me know that they're still alive.
That's always good.
We have a lot of bobcats out here and coyotes. We are very much a nature preserve. So when I hear the ducks, I know they've made it, and that's a good sign. And they all get pretty smart and get places where the predators can't get them.
All right, and then one last thing. You guys are famous for your irises, and I know at the visitor center, I get calls and Facebook messages all the time saying, how do I know when the irises or the roses or the others are in bloom? So is there a way for us to know quick and easy?
The quickest and easiest way to think about the irises is mid-April.
Okay.
And you can kind of count on that year in, year out. They're a little slow this year because of the weather, the cold weather that we got. So I would say even this year from April 15th to May 1st, you're not going to be disappointed in seeing the irises. The rest, people call us all the time and want to know when, and it's so weather dependent.
Yeah.
It's just really hard to tell you when something specifically is going on. But I can guarantee you're going to have irises April 15th through May 1st.
Okay.
Unless there's a hail damage.
And bluebonnets. Did the bluebonnets make it?
Yes, the bluebonnets did make it. Not as prolific as they are, but that just means next year they'll get bigger. Okay. Spread more. So bluebonnets this year, again, we're a little late. Mid-March maybe. So usually the tulips and daffodils are late February, and then moving into March, and then you start your iris season, and you kind of go from there. The perennials are always more late May through the summer.
Okay. Well, Carol, thank you for showing us about our pollinators and how to plant for them, and telling us the stories about your favorites. We're going to take everybody out on a tour.
Great. You'll have a fun time today.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for hosting us.
Okay.